going on, everybody, and welcome into the start of another edition of Burke's Beat. I'm Danny Burke, your host. Incredibly excited to be with you as we get closer to the start of the NBA Finals. That's what we're going to be covering on this episode, and we'll be joined by one of the best NBA handicappers, mine's biggest fans I know, Jacob Roach, at Roach_97, where you can catch him on Twitter. He comes on the podcast pretty frequently, so I'm sure you have heard him in the past, and he is a die-hard Boston Celtics fan, so it will be very interesting to see how he's approaching this championship series. But Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, their crew, laying anywhere from -210 to -220 to cap this thing off. And on the other side, representing the Western Conference, the duo of Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving in the underdog role at about +175 to +180 to claim their championship title. So not only will I give my thoughts, I'll do a breakdown with Jacob momentarily, but I implore you to check out my column that I wrote for the Sporting Tribune. I've been contributing to them for quite some time now, and it is pinned at the top of my Twitter if you want to check it out, at DannyBurke5 on the tweets. I'll also link it in the description of this podcast, and it'll be on the website as well, burkspeed.com. But it's just a different way to look at it because I do a full, extensive breakdown. You can see all the stats, my betting guide to the series if you like one side versus the other. And I also have a prop for Game 1. And speaking of the props, I think it's important to look at it because I note the differences, the deviations rather, in the statistical matchup from how these teams looked in the regular season to how they have fared in the postseason. So what is that going to mean for certain players, types of guys who can thrive on a game-to-game basis? Some dudes that maybe you should back in their player props in each and every game, or at least monitor it. And then conversely, some guys you maybe look to fade because it's not the most viable matchup for them based on this specific circumstance. So again, I really encourage you to check it out. It gives you a full breakdown and you can see the stats right there in your eyes and formulate opinions of your own to help you process a betting approach on a game-to-game basis. So again, that's over at the Sporting Tribune, pinned on my profile, link in the description. Make sure you check out my column previewing the NBA Finals. But let's go ahead and get into it. Jacob Roach, not only is he a top NBA mind, but he's also a producer on the Rush podcast with Max Crosby of the Las Vegas Raiders. So the man is all over the place. Always love chatting with him. Let's go ahead and get into the interview here on Burke's Beat. Alrighty, now it is time to welcome on our pal Jacob Roach at Roach_97 here on Burke's Beat. He's a frequent flyer of the program. He's been on a couple times, and we used to work together back in Las Vegas for a couple different operations, couple different shows. And like I've always said, Jacob, one of the most in-tune people when it comes to following the NBA, not only from just a fan standpoint, but from a handicapping perspective as well. So always love to give Jacob's thoughts on some of the biggest stages when it comes to the association. And it just works out so perfectly that his favorite team, the Boston Celtics, are in the NBA Finals taking on the Dallas Mavericks. And by the way, folks, not only is Jacob spectacular with his NBA coverage, he also produces The Rush with the Las Vegas Raiders' Max Crosby. So make sure you check out all of their content wherever you get your podcasts available. Jacob, a pleasure to have you back on. Your team is in the finals. Not really a surprise, even when Porzingis went out. I don't think it shocked too many people to see them at this stage. But Kristaps is coming back. You're going up against Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. The Celtics around a -210, -220 favorite. How are we feeling? Your thoughts on the odds, the matchup? Lay it all on us, my friend.
You know, I'm getting flashbacks. In 22, I remember doing a hit with you on a different show at the time about Jacob Celtics in the finals against the Warriors. And I'm like, oh, shit, here we go again, huh? Let's start with the price. I think the price is kind of crazy. So if the Mavs win, and I'm not saying they're going to, they would be like one of the biggest underdogs to ever win the finals in a series price, which shocks me at +175. Mm-hmm. I think I thought it was going to be more like 150, -190, -185 for the Celtics, +150 for the Mavs. So a little shocked in the price. But I don't know how you bet the Mavs, just to be honest, right? Like, Well, I'm a Celtics fan, but I think I'm pretty even keel.
Hmm.
I just don't know if you like the Mavs. I think you just have to play them game by game.
Yeah, that's kind of how I'm assessing it too. In looking at it from a entirety of the series vantage point, wouldn't you say if you're someone who likes the Mavericks, because right now at best you're probably getting what, like plus 180, plus 185.
Yeah.
Dallas is catching 6.5 in game one. And if they're going to split the first of two games on the road against Boston, more often than not, the game they're going to win is probably going to be game two. At least that's what it usually seems to be when you get these teams in these road situations. Maybe this year's a little bit different, but in years past, it seems like that's typically how it goes down. So my thought process would be if you like Dallas for the series, wait to see if they fall victim in game one, and then you're going to get a much improved price heading into game two because the Celtics are still going to be a pretty sizable favorite in game number two. And then you're going to get a lot better of a plus price on Dallas to win the series in general. And if you still have that conviction with the assumption they're going to fall short in game one, then you're just setting yourself up better. So that's how I would look at it. Or like you're saying, approach it from a game to game standpoint if they're going to be catching a handful of points.
Or you maybe go, I just feel like I don't know if people are not aware of the correct score market in a series, but you should probably never bet a series line without betting a correct score because you could go Mavs in 6 plus
Yeah.
550. Like, just bet that. Just the series price, in my opinion, in this one is just it's dumb to say it's not touchable because people are like, what do you mean? Like, but it's just not touchable because I think there's other values across the board in this series than just being like, I'll lay $2 on the Celtics. That sounds like a terrible time
Mhm.
when you could also get the Celtics plus money for any of the series outcomes. I think that's the only way to bet. I think it's the only way to bet playoffs, honestly. I don't know why unless you're doing a parlay with series prices, I don't know why you would touch a series price.
Yeah, if you're looking at the underdog, the series price is very tempting. Like for example, the one that I look back on it and felt the best about, and at the time I thought it was disrespectful, and clearly in hindsight it was too, is the fact that the Timberwolves were catching plus money against the Phoenix Suns to open the postseason, right? I mean, that's one where I went in with the Minnesota Timberwolves and thought this is just the Kevin Durant tax on the other side. So I thought that was a good angle from them being an underdog. And obviously in hindsight too, them against the Nuggets, although I was not a part of that per se. But yeah, I mean, you're right. There are a lot of good options to find some value, whether it's in the exactas, total games played, exact number of games played, all of those type of things. And I'll share my series bet that I'm making with you momentarily. But first, Jacob, I did want to kind of bring up just the overall matchups of these teams and really looking at the side of Boston and why this also kind of filters in eventually to my bet here when you look at the differences from Boston from the regular season to the postseason, because there have been deviations with these stats, right? Now, Boston, it seems, in the playoffs has really been susceptible to allowing the big men of the opposition to thrive down low. They've allowed their opponents to make over 70% of their shots at the rim during the playoffs in comparison to sub 64% during season play. Now, of course, Porzingis has been out, so sure, that can impact it to a certain degree. But you look at opponents who have taken a majority of their shots at the rim in the series they've had. Hawkes Jr., 13 points per game he averaged. Evan Mobley, over 21 points per game against the Celtics. Obi Toppin, 10.5 points per game. Those are guys in their respective teams that's taking a majority of their shots at the rim. So I'm thinking a guy like a Daniel Gafford, a Derek Lively, could really be efficient in looking at their player prop points for 8.5 points for Gafford plus money to the over in all series long. That could really hinder a team like Boston, and why I think this could be a longer series and a series where you target some of those guys with their respective props. What do you think about those statistics and how they may match up in that regard?
So the thing I thought about this series a lot. Obviously, I started thinking about it, game 2 of the Timberwolves series. The thing that worried me the most was Gafford and Lively because we saw in the Pacers series that every single action was about getting Al Horford out of position and attacking
Right.
Al Horford. Now, Porzingis is going to be back. That's amazing. We can get to that in a second. But it's the energy and the athleticism of those two that just really scare me. And I think the only thing that the Celtics can do to combat that, because they just don't have the bigs and the athleticism from the bigs,
Mhm.
is they have to play them off the court on the offensive side. Like they need to play small to where the point where the Mavericks has to match their lineups. I will also say to those numbers, like they had Bam Adebayo in the first round, right? One of the better centers in the East. In the second round, they had Mobley, who was literally putting up like career stats against them, and I'm a Mobley guy. And then they had Miles Turner and Siakam, who are both really skilled and a really good tandem of bigs. Plus, like you said, Obi Toppin. So they had a lot. Those teams, in a sense, almost had more size in places in Dallas. They had a lot of more versatile size, I'll say. Dallas has just kind of like a straight up going to hit you at the rim size, which will allow the Celtics to defend differently. Like they don't have to worry about Miles Turner and Siakam stepping out and hitting threes. Adebayo's playmaking is next level. So I think that helps, but I do think that is my biggest concern. I'm not so much concerned about the matchups on Luka and Kyrie. I've just been really concerned about the energy and the athleticism of these Mavericks bigs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way they've surged has been impressive because you knew that the addition of, say, even if you look at PJ Washington, but then getting Gafford as well, and then Lively stepping up when need be, you figured they would come around at some point once they acquired a couple of those players throughout the season, but they've really hit their stride at the most important parts, which is great for a team like Dallas. And what's really notable too, Jacob, aside from the viable matchup they may have on the offensive side, is defensively they've improved a ton. I mean, this was a defense that was incredibly liable and blew them a ton of contests in the past. Now you look at their effective field goal percentage from the season to the postseason, 55% down to 51.4%. They're limiting makes at the rim to 59.5% as opposed to over 67% during the regular season. Sure, the competitive fire steps up a notch when you come into the playoffs, but a lot of that speaks volumes to the additions of a guy like a Gafford, how Lively stepped up, bringing in PJ Washington and the athleticism you speak of. And I think that will cause some trouble for Porzingis down low, for Horford down low. Yes, those are guys who a majority of their shots are away from the rim, but once they get near the bucket, I think those bigs in Boston are going to struggle.
Yeah, and the other thing, the slept on part of that whole equation is in the NBA, like a good big needs a good decision maker. And
Mm-hmm.
Dallas doesn't really have a backup point guard. So most of the game, the only people who are making decisions are Luka and Kyrie with the rotation. Sometimes
Yep.
Hardy and Hardaway, but like there's not a backup point guard. So there's usually always a really good decision maker finishing the plays. And that's another thing that like, again, it worries me because it's not like they have like Ish Smith out there that the Celtics can just swarm and attack. So now they can't get into these sets for the bigs. Like, no, they have confident playmakers on the floor pretty much at all times. So it's really tough. The Mavericks just went and said, hey, we're going to go get help for Luka and Kyrie, but we're not going to get anyone smaller than Luka, which is a really interesting take. Like, we're going to get Derrick Jones Jr., Bulls legend. We're going to get Gafford. We're going to get Washington. We're going to draft Lively. So they just drafted size. And I think that's kind of been an underrated part of this whole build. Everyone wants to talk about like, oh, they flipped the team. Well, yeah, because they just went for size and athleticism.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say it's easy, but like I don't know why other teams don't think like that. But that's the big concern for me is there's never going to be a break when they're not attacking the rim.
Yeah, and look, not only Derrick Jones Jr. Bulls legend, but Daniel Gafford Bulls legend. So
Yeah.
Chicago getting represented in the finals in some capacity. The only way they're going to be able to do so, unless something changes, which we know inevitably won't happen. I digress, though, Jacob. To the bet that I did make. Now, I know, again, you're kind of talking about this, and I don't disagree, but when you're looking at these series props, it's a lot more intriguing and profitable, of course, to look at these plus money bets. But I'm betting this with strong conviction and for a little bit security in the sense of not targeting down one team or for it to fall on a specific game. But I'm betting this series to go over 5.5 games. The price that was the best available last week was minus $1.45. I didn't get in time by the time that I published the article for the Sporting Tribune. Minus 150 at DraftKings was the best available. And that's the play I took. I mean, look, I do think Dallas is going to be able to snag a game or two on the road. They're 7-3 on the road this postseason. The 2 games Boston has lost throughout the playoffs have been at home. No, that doesn't mean it's going to happen necessarily again in the finals. It's just Dallas is good enough to sneak a win away from home, as we've seen in the past against solid competition. So I think this does go to at least 6 games. If you want to go another direction for that plus money, you like the Celtics, for example. I'm just looking at DraftKings, but you could do the Celtics to win in 6 at plus 475. And you could also do the Celtics to win in 7 at plus 350. That, if you do think it goes long, but you have the more conviction on the side of Boston as opposed to Dallas, I don't hate that route because I do think Boston does end up on top. But I just think this is a little bit more of a safer play, thinking it's going to be competitive. Dallas can match up well enough, and Boston has shown they're vulnerable enough to dropping a game or two.
Can I be honest with you?
Yeah, let's hear it.
About 3 weeks ago, I started saying this to anyone who would listen, and I'm going to stand by it. This was after the Celtics closed out the Cavs.
Mm-hmm.
I said, the Celtics are not losing a game the rest of the playoffs. And I'm going to stand by that, Danny. I think every game is going to be close. But honestly, this is where my head's at. Because you guys will be like, oh, Homer, Homer. And yeah, some of it is being a Homer.
Sure.
Who's the best player that Luka has had to face off and beat in the playoffs?
I mean, when you're going down the list of who the best for him, it's Anthony Edwards, I guess. Yeah, because Kawhi was injured. Paul George is Paul George. I think Anthony Edwards I would take over Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So I would go with Ant.
Who's better, Ant or Tatum?
Man, I mean, right now it's Tatum.
Come on.
It's Tatum.
Yeah.
It's Tatum. It's Tatum.
You have to say right now. This game's getting played. The series
Right.
starts Thursday, right? So I look at the narrative, and everyone's like, the Celtics have walked through the East. Unfortunately, when you're the first seed, you get a lot of favorable situations, and health is health. And the Celtics, we want to pile on for their easiest route in the world. They were also missing one of their best players. At nights, their best, certainly the third or fourth best, right? No one wants to talk about that. And also, look, I get it. The Wolves won 50 games. OKC won 50 games. Great. In the grand scheme of competitive and tough teams in the last 5, 10, even 2 years, I'm not thinking of the 2024 Thunder and Timberwolves, to be honest with you. Those are two teams that are super young and have a lot of flaws. It has flaws that were easy to expose. If I look at the Boston Celtics, I look at a champion in Drew Holiday who, for the last 5 years, has always been the best perimeter guard. I look at Derek White, who is a top 5 defender at the guard position, right? So that's who you're going with guards. You got Tatum and Brown, who are the best forward wing tandem, whatever you want to call them, in the league, and they have been for 3 years, and they have been in a finals. They've been up against the Golden State Warriors in a finals. And then you have Porzingis, who's one of the more versatile big men. You have Al Horford, who's just a very smart player. Don't get me started about the Celtics bench. I'm not a big fan of it. Or the Peyton Pritchard I've really came around on.
He's
but
a stud.
At the end of the day, I just don't know how you look at these teams and you're like, man, the Mavs. The Mavs beat a lot of young teams and they beat a really old team. And honestly, if you take the 3 teams that the Mavs beat and everything that they struggled with is everything that Boston's good at. So that's why when I look at this matchup, I also think Luka's pretty hurt. And I just don't think that the Timberwolves or even the Thunder had a player that made Luka work. And Brown will probably be the primary on Luka, which I don't want it to be Brown. I actually want it to be Tatum because Tatum is legitimately bigger than Luka. Everyone wants to talk about Luka's so big, Luka's so big. I don't know if anyone's seen Tatum lately. He's 6'10". He's 6'10". He has prime Derrick Rose shoulders, which is a very niche reference, but he has these awesome wide shoulders, which helps him get to the rim. And he's 6'10", and he's a really good defender. So I don't understand all of this praise for the Mavs for pulling it out of their ass in 3 rounds, which has been awesome. But there's no praise for the Celtics for just literally taking care of business. And everyone's be like, what about the Cavs games? What about the close Pacers games? What about losing a game here? You guys don't it's so hard to just eliminate a team. And because those last 2 games of elimination is just every team is scrapping and fighting. So obviously there's going to be some close games in there. But were they ever embarrassed? Maybe one time by the Heat in an anomaly of a night. But that happens. So I honestly think the Celtics are going to make this a quick series. I think they're going to really just take care of business. I don't think they're fucking around anymore.
Well, and the reason there's that sentiment too, Jacob, I mean, you think about where the bar's been set for the Celtics team in the years past and having that experience, being the number one team, the best team in the NBA, looking at Dallas, not I don't want to say that they weren't a championship contender. Obviously they were, but they weren't everybody's top pick. They came in as the fifth seed and they were a very flawed team. So now they're the hot commodity. It's a recency bias, seeing how they dominated against Minnesota from the public perception. So that's why it's kind of a public darling here with Dallas, which again, I don't think they're going to win. I'm just banking on them at least getting a couple of games and making this a longer series. I agree with you, though. I mean, the Celtics are prepared for this more so than Dallas is in terms of a statistical standpoint and having that experience that they have been to the finals and they have lost. They have been to all these conference finals and fallen short. They have been chiseled with that adversity to prepare them for this spot. Yes, Dallas has postseason experience, but not to this extent. The other thing, too, is what can they do late in the games to potentially limit Luka Doncic? That's been another reason why the Mavericks has succeeded because Luka, even though he's looked banged up a little bit, you do get more than a week off. But what he's been able to do at the end of games, it's either, all right, you're double teaming him and that leaves someone else open, or he's making a great shot, or you're fouling him. I mean, the space that it creates and his ability to draw contact is impressive. And I think at the same time, Jacob, that's almost why you may not want to put Tatum on him because you don't want to risk putting him in foul trouble. If they choose not to do that, that would be my guess. But that's the biggest question. How is Boston going to defend this Mavericks team down late in the fourth? It's something that no team has been able to do, really.
That's where I want Tatum to close on Luka. I
Sure.
want Brown most of the game. And, Luka's great. Luka's the second best player in the league. But these guys also played LeBron for 5 years straight in the playoffs when they were a lot smaller and a lot younger and didn't know as much about basketball as they do now. Like, they have played greatness. They've beat Giannis in a series, in a 7-game series. Like, Luka's awesome. Luka's great, but Luka's gonna have to really work in this series. Like, who's Luka gonna guard? You can't hide Luka. Like, and even the worst case scenario switch for the Celtics is what? Like Derek White. Would you rather have Derek White in a switch or Mike Conley? You'd rather have Derek White. So any of the weaknesses that they switch onto, the Celtics are so well equipped, and everyone's talking about, Luka, Kyrie. The Celtics have the second and third best player in this series. I don't want to hear the Kyrie's the second or third best player. Jaylen Brown's a better player right now than Kyrie Irving. And then after that, it's Kyrie, and then it's 4 Celtics. So I'm just not that worried about the late game stuff because we have the bodies, and I'm more worried about who is Luka going to guard legitimately. Like, he's better at defense, but I still want Tatum. Like, I'm still taking Tatum over him if they're playing. If he's guarding Tatum, and he's not going to guard Tatum, it's going to be Derrick Jones, who has been an awesome story, but he's not a world beater of a defender, right? Like, we get caught up in the narratives. As crazy as this is to say, I think if the Nuggets made it, more people would pick Boston over the Nuggets. Than there would be a more pro Boston narrative if the Nuggets were in the finals and not the Mavericks.
Interesting. Yeah, that could be the case. I mean, Denver just looks so lackadaisical in so many efforts that even if they made it to this point, I think people would just be so cautious about investing in them for another series, especially against this Boston team that seems primed to finally get their championship with this core. Jacob, we got a few more minutes with you here, my man, and I know you alluded to Jaylen Brown, and that's where I want to go next. Finals MVP. How could you not flirt with the idea of Jaylen Brown, right? He's plus 650 I'm seeing right now at DraftKings. Tatum minus 115, Lucas plus 205, Kyrie Irving 22-1, Porzingis 35-1. I guess I get it from the narrative standpoint. Tatum is the captain of the team, and a lot of times they're going to win. It would be attributed to him. But a bet I made last series was Jaylen Brown to be the leading scorer of the series. I missed it by 2 points at the same odds, plus 650. I was furious. But Brown has been a stud offensively. And if Tatum has an off game or two and Brown comes through in a clutch again, maybe the narrative shifts a little bit toward Jaylen, and the plus money is at least worth some pizza money. Do you see it that way, or is it Tatum or nothing for you?
No, I think Brown, because Brown has a couple things going for him, because Brown is the leader of this team. He's been here the longest. He's the alpha. He's the aggressor. It's also the Brown Tatum thing reminds me. This is gonna be very obscure and only a reference I would really get. It reminds me of Juju Smith-Schuster and Antonio Brown. Okay? When those two were together on the Steelers, Juju was amazing. You know why? Because all the focus was on Brown.
Right.
Antonio Brown. Confusion there. But you look at Jaylen Brown, and he's playing amazing because all the focus is on Tatum. If Brown was the one, the true one, he wouldn't get these scoring numbers. Just like when AB left the Steelers, Juju wasn't putting up the numbers he was when he was the two. So you have to take that into account. But the thing that can swing this more than the scoring is if Jalen's the primary on Luka and he holds Luka to like 2 games with 24 points, I think he could win it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in agreement with you there, my man. Game 1 odds, 6.5. The Celtics are laying. Total at about 214.5. Anything you would recommend pre-flop? Do you look for an in-game approach? How would you tell people to bet this spot?
I think you have to go look maybe the under. I think the Celtics want to pace down a little bit to start because you're bringing Porzingis back. You want him to get comfortable. It's a feel-out game. The Mavs will probably be tight. It's their first game in the finals. So I would go under. I wouldn't touch the spread until you really get to look at the game. Maybe in-game. But, look, I think it's going to be a sweep, but I think it's going to be a close sweep.
Okay, close sweep for the Boston Celtics over the Dallas Mavericks. That via Jacob Roach. Now, full disclosure, diehard Celtics fan. No, look, I do agree with you. Boston should get the job done here, but just hoping Dallas makes it an entertaining series at least and is able to notch a couple so we could get that series bet that I took home. So
I know. I don't want an entertaining series. I don't want to have to stress. I just want it to be over.
You got to stress, man.
No,
you got to get a little bit.
I'm so sick of Brown and Tatum being punished for being successful at a young age. I just want it to be done.
Oh, one question we didn't really get into it too much. Kristaps Porzingis, 15.5 was his points prop. I feel like I would want to lean toward the under as he gets acclimated again and because of these matchups. How do you think he fares out of the gate? We forgot to expound on this. Do you think it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment for the big man?
So that would scare me in game 1 because a lot of their game plan throughout the season has been like, hey, Porzingis, quarter 1, score. And he kind of has set the tone and he's really been aggressive in quarter 1. So I just don't know what that's going to be like his first game back. I could see it. That's a point prop where it's going to be, if you don't hit, you're missing by a point. Like that's a tough one. I don't hate it, but my concern is just he gets a lot of his scoring done early, and I don't know how it's going to fare him with his first game back and his first game in the finals ever.
Yeah, and hey, that's a good point too, because a lot of these books offer live props. So if Porzingis does come out firing out of the gate, see if it adjusts higher than 15.5 and then maybe come back in on the under. So
yeah,
that could definitely be a viable option as well. But great stuff. Jacob Roach, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, you could follow him on Twitter at Roach_97, producer of The Rush with Max Crosby. Make sure you check that out on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Jacob, I'll say best of luck to you. You know, you're a Boston Celtics fan, so you get good treatment all the time. But I do wish you the best of luck. Enjoy the series. Hopefully they don't make it too stressful in their wins or losses, but maybe they get a couple losses. We can both be happy. But I'm sure you'll be happy at the end of this regardless, my friend.
Yeah, that or I have to be like a Magic fan.
Wendell Carter Jr., baby. Get that jersey going. All right, there he is, folks. Jacob Roach, big shout out to him. And thank you all for tuning into another edition of Burke's Beat. Make sure you check out the website, burksbeat.com, and the article I put out with more in-depth preview for the finals at the Sporting Tribune. Link in the description below and on my Twitter at DannyBurke5. Best of luck with all your plays. Thank you for tuning in, and take care.